Hello, Apes, and welcome to screencast number 4. This is Chapter 6, Ethics, Economics, and Sustainable Development. We were just getting ready to talk about environmental justice seeks equal treatment for all races and classes. So when we take a look at environmental justice by definition is the fair and equitable treatment of all people with respect to the environmental policy and practice, regardless of their income, race, or ethnicity. So it is a particular domain of ethical concern that really has been expanding over the years, and this ethical expansion involves applying a standard of equal treatments. So poor people tend to be exposed to greater share of pollution, hazards, and environmental degradation than rich people are, and it means that the poor and the minorities need to be treated with equal environmental justice. It also says that racial and ethnic minorities tend to suffer more exposure to most hazards than whites. So this means that justice needs to encompass that avenue. And then the poor and non-white communities each tend to bear heavier burdens of air pollution, lead poisoning, pesticide exposure, toxic waste exposure, and workplace hazards. So it says that there is a gap that really happens between the rich and the poor, and we need to narrow this gap. We can't let it widen. We have to bring it closer together. So we need to treat all people equally regarding the environmental issues and not just focus on one group. Okay? When we think about the poor, the minorities, they often have less access to information on environmental health risks. They also have less political power in order to protect their interests. They have less money to spend to avoid or alleviate any risk that happen. And they blame institutionalized racism and inadequate government policies on those problems. So here, detoxification protects landfills, and it's telling it to kill it, to get rid of it. Dump the hump. In the coal mining parts of the country, Virginia, we can see this where the coal miners, they live in areas that even though they come out of the coal mines, their land has been destroyed from coal mining. There's toxic sludge and gases that seep up through the grounds because of what they're doing, and they're expected to live in these areas. So this is some of the stuff that we have to make sure we get away from and have equal rights for everybody, no matter what racial standing would include. So from 1948 to the 1960s, neither the U.S. government nor the mining industry provided Indians, Navajo uranium miners with any information or protection. Native Americans, they have encountered many environmental injustice issues over the years. The miners were not made aware of any radiation or any risk of radiation. Many of the Navajo families built homes and bread baking ovens out of the waste rock from the mines, and they didn't realize that it was radioactive. They started to get lung cancer and other problems, health risks from that. Radiation, they established, and I'm trying to think of how to put this, they had established a Radiation Exposure Compensation Act in 1990 30 some odd years later in order to compensate the Navajo miners who suffered health effects from the unprotected work in the mines. Low-income white residents of the Appalachian region that I mentioned in Virginia, they have had their water polluted and environment damaged by mountaintop removals for coal mining. This is one of the up and coming big things where mountaintop mining literally cuts off the mountains. It causes runoff. It puts toxic sludge into freshwater ecosystems, and it causes avalanches, and it causes flooding that happens. And the low-income white residents that live there haven't been able to do much about it. The most negatively impacted people were those people after Hurricane Katrina that lived in the poor non-white communities. So we have a tendency not to distribute our justice equally. Take a look at this. This was after Katrina in one of the poor areas. So the question becomes, is there a fair trade-off between the economy and the environment? And we've got to see environmental justice as the key component in pursuing environmental and economic and social goals of sustainability and sustainable development. But if the truth is told, there's still quite a bit of friction that occurs between the ethical and economic impulses. What we deem right is not always economically feasible. So I gave you that example in Ocean City, Maryland, of that condo community. They got rid of recycling their plastics in their cans because economically it wasn't feasible. But ethically, we know that we need to recycle because those things pollute our environment. So some say protection costs too much money, it interferes with progress, or it causes job losses, while others argue that environmental protection is good for the economy. And the way that we look at it in this book is that the initial economic cost is going to be expensive, but if we continue in that area and develop technology, that economic cost should be decreasing, and we should experience economic gain. The difference in view is often a result of thinking in the short term versus the long term. A lot of people don't think in the long term. So that's one of the things that causes a problem. Traditional economic thought ignores or underestimates the contributions of the environment to the economy. We rely on those natural resources. Without it, we would not have an economy. And we underestimate that sometimes. And we need to know that our economies depend on the environment. So you've heard me throw the term economics around, and economics is how people study, or is a study, excuse me, of how people use resources to provide goods and services in the face of demand, in the face of what we need. And when we consider economic problems, most environmental and economic problems are linked. When we even take a look at the word economics, ecology, that root oikos, it means household, and it gives rise to both ecology and economics. So when we look at economy, we know that this is a social system, and that social system converts the resources into goods. And these are any materials that are bought, that are used for the quality of life or to enhance life, and services, and that is the work done for others as a form of a business. And these are the two factors of a good economy. So we can break down economy into two different groups. Subsistence economy. This is the economy in which people get their daily needs direct from nature or their own production. So your farmers, they do not purchase or trade products. They make their products. They live off the land, so to speak. And then the capitalist market economy, which is where we have buyers and sellers. And we interact with them to determine the prices and the production of the goods and services. Look at an iPhone 7. An iPhone 7 cost about $500 to $600. And that's because the buyers are willing to pay that amount. If we all decided not to buy iPhone 7s, then they would start to lower the prices. So once the demand goes down for it and nobody's buying, the prices drop. So that's how a capitalist market is going to work. We have something called central planned economies, and these are economies in which the government determines how to allocate the resources. So you're looking at countries that will control the goods. And then we look at a mixed economy, and this is the ones where governments intervene to some extent, but they do not necessarily control the goods and the resources. Most national economies are balanced approaches of both of these, and that lack of balance is where the problems come. And if they're not regulated, it can cause recessions like we saw in 2009. So our societies and our economies exist within a natural environment, and they depend on it in vital ways. These are economies that receive inputs such as natural resources and ecosystem services from the environment, and then they process them in various ways. They use them in different ways. The material inputs and the waste absorbing capacity that the earth can provide are ultimately finite. They're not infinite. They've got a limit to them. Although the interactions between economies and the environment are readily apparent, traditional economic schools of thought have long overlooked their importance, and many mainstream economists still adhere to the worldview that largely ignores the environment. They work on the idea that resources are free and limitless, not finite, and that the waste are absorbed at no cost. But we're learning that trees can only absorb a certain amount of carbon dioxide, and then they can't absorb any more. So what's that like? Well, go to your sink. Fill up a glass with water. That glass can only hold up so much water, right? What happens if you let that water running? If you keep putting carbon dioxide into the system, what's going to happen to that water? It's going to overflow. That carbon dioxide's going to overflow, and it increases the greenhouse gases, and then we start to see global climate change happening as a result. So it's not limitless, and there is a cost. The conventional view, which continues to drive most policies and decisions, implies that the inputs such as materials like natural resources, as I said, are free and limitless. Modern economists belonging to the fast-growing fields of environmental economics and ecological economies explicitly recognize that the economies exist within the environment and depend crucially upon it for their natural resources. We're coming to the end. We'll start the fifth screencast in just a moment.